Week 6 is upon us, so we're breaking down some trade targets. Today, we're going to be bringing you 4 wide receiver buy lows, 2 wide receiver sell highs, a little bit of tight end talk in there. Last week, we asked you guys, do you like it when we're both on the video, when we talk about running backs and wide receivers? You said, keep both of us on the video, but split up the positions so we are men of the people, and we decided to listen to you. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it. All right, so like I said, week 6 trade targets. We're going to be breaking down some wide receivers that we are looking to buy low on the open market right now. I can kick things off with a guy who was drafted very highly, a guy that's been pretty solid so far this season, but has yet to have his explosion game. He's yet to have a game where he puts up 25 PPR points, 30 PPR points, like we know he's capable of doing. A guy that was out last week with Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver of the Detroit Lions. The way I look at this situation is I always want to invest in players on great teams. And I think the Detroit Lions are probably the third best team in the NFC, at least the third best offense in the NFC, probably behind the Eagles and the San Francisco 49ers week in and week out. We can count on the Lions to put up points. And like I said, I want good players on good teams. I know Amon-Ra St. Brown has been productive. I can't really explain the lack of boom performances that we haven't seen yet. Maybe it's David Montgomery getting most of the touchdowns. Maybe it's the Sam Laporta breakout. He's just kind of been solid. But believe me, the breakout performances are coming. All the peripherals are there for him. 27% of the targets. He's getting most of the third down targets, most of the air yards. And right now, I think Amon-Ra St. Brown, the mid wide receiver one, low end wide receiver one that he is rest of season, is being valued more so as like a high-end wide receiver 2, mid wide receiver 2 on the open market. On the open market right now, according to the Yahoo Trade Finder, you can trade away Alvin Kamara for him, or Nico Collins for him, or Kenneth Walker and Brock Purdy for him, or DJ Moore for him, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, or Saquon Barkley for Amon-Ra and Jacoby Myers. There's moves that you can make involving Amon-Ra St. Brown that do not require you to pay the mid wide receiver 1 price tag that I still have him ranked as rest of season. He's my wide receiver 8 rest of season right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. The main basis of this is because he's only scored 2 touchdowns and he did miss that game. But as we know, I mean, the target involvement has been there 9, 7, 12, 7 throughout the season. And we know that when the Detroit Lions offense is operating at their full capacity, Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to get his share of the pie. Jared Goff's playing well. Like you mentioned, this offense has looked really good. Ben Johnson, the implementations he has had from a schematic standpoint has really helped develop this offense into what it is. Obviously, we know what David Montgomery's been able to do from a rushing perspective, but I do think when the Amon-Ra St. Brown is fully healthy, the identity of this football team will be getting this guy the football in space. And as we've seen in the past, as soon as he gets that amount of targets, he is a legitimate top 6 to 8 wide receiver in fantasy. And like you said, because he's been off these last couple of weeks, you probably could get him for more of a top 12 level price.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing to point out about their upcoming schedule, too, is that the Buccaneers and Ravens are their next 2 opponents. And both of those teams are teams you want to pass against and not run against, which makes sense why maybe David Montgomery has a little bit more of a down stretch of production and Amon-Ra St. Brown maybe has 2 explosion games in a row, for example. And then they have the Raiders, the Chargers, the Bears, and the Packers, teams that they can put up points against. They can run and pass against those teams. The way I look at it is that you're getting a great solidified option and a great offense, which is always somebody that you want to be trading for, especially if you've started out 4-1 or 5-0 or even 3-2, or even if you're struggling. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is a good guy to go after. Maybe you tier down from somebody who's having a monster start to the season, like a Stephon Diggs or something. Like I just traded away Stephon Diggs in my home league. I didn't want to do it, but if you can get Amon-Ra plus like a back end RB1 type, maybe you can do that because you need depth and you're 2-3 or you're 1-4 or something like that.
Yeah, I agree with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I do think that out of all the guys that I personally would have as a first-round option rest of the season, he is one of the cheaper options that you can currently get in your trade market, like you mentioned. My first buy, very similar theme to a guy that's getting a lot of volume, but hasn't really materialized into raw production quite yet. Chris Olave, wide receiver of the New Orleans Saints. I hate to bring up a Saint, obviously, with you being such a big Tampa Bay fan, but the peripherals are absolutely there. He's such an easy smash. He's coming off, of course, his 2 worst games of the season, 11 combined targets, 3 combined catches, only about 11 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks combined. But that's easily explainable. Derek Carr's been dealing with an AC joint sprain the last 2 weeks, hasn't been able to push the ball down the field. And if you guys are unfamiliar with the injury the AC joint sprain is it's an injury you can play through, but it's very pain tolerant space. So if he's dealing with the pain of his shoulder hurting, it makes sense as to why he doesn't want to push the ball down the field. So I do think as Derek Carr continues to get healthier, we saw in the first 3 games for Chris Olave, 10 targets, 11 targets, 11 targets. Each of those weeks performing over 15 fantasy points, despite not scoring a touchdown in that stretch. I do think once Derek Carr starts looking back to what he was looking at the start of the year, it'll help Olave bounce back in a big way. Despite the 2 down weeks, he's still the clear alpha in this Saints passing attack. 27% of the targets on the year, 42% of the team's air yards, 31% of the end zone targets. He's currently being treated as like a mid to low end wide receiver 2 on the trade market, but his peripherals, in my opinion, and knowing that Carr's going to be healthy going forward, give him a top 15 baseline. And I do think that if he can show that level he was at in the first 3 games of the season, he can get back to, fringe wide receiver 1 level status. And some of these trades that he's listed as going for, I mean, Chris Olave for Zay Flowers straight up. I mentioned last week how much I love Zay Flowers, but if I can then transition him now into Chris Olave, I'm doing that every single time. Terry McLaurin plus Brian Robinson for Chris Olave, a little bit closer, but if you're trying to consolidate, you have some depth. I like going and getting the upgrade there. That is Chris Olave. A.J. Brown coming off a big high. Can you get Chris Olave and Lamar Jackson, turn A.J. Brown, who's a really good wide receiver, but honestly, what's the real difference in projection between Olave and A.J. Brown rest of the season?
Yeah, I would prefer A.J. Brown given the attachment to the offense that you're getting. But if you're getting a massive upgrade at
Lamar
quarterback,
Jackson,
then it probably balances itself out. I also think the underrated part of Chris Olave, too, is they've played against a bunch of teams that run like slow paces, like the Patriots this past week. They weren't competitive on offense at all, didn't have to throw the ball very much. The Houston Texans have been a very up-tempo offense that they play this week. They can put up points. The Saints are going to have to do the same. Jacksonville Jaguars, who they play in 2 weeks from now, also the same type of thing. They can put up points on offense, more of an up-tempo scheme. And then after that, Colts secondary is very exploitable. Bears secondary is very exploitable. Vikings secondary is very exploitable. So very good stretch of games coming up for Chris Olave here. Definitely makes a lot of sense as a trade target. We still value him as like a high-end wide receiver 2 rest of the season. That's about where I have him ranked. Maybe even a low-end wide receiver 1 if he gets hot.
Yeah.
So yeah, Chris Olave for probably available for mid wide receiver 2 price tags, if not cheaper than that, like you mentioned. So definitely think he's a good trade target, even though he plays for the Saints, and I absolutely hate the Saints. I think he's probably a guy that is worth going after. You actually mentioned Terry McLaurin as part of a trade package to get Chris Olave. If you can't afford to go up and get Chris Olave, I think Terry McLaurin is actually a fairly decent trade target as well. And mainly because Terry McLaurin has not performed to Terry McLaurin levels thus far this season. But we're actually getting better situational environment than we've ever gotten for Terry McLaurin, which is so frustrating because we've usually seen high target share, very productive, one of the better real-life receivers in the NFL, 22.3% target share last year, 24.5% in 2021, 25.1% in 2020. This year, only an 18% target share for Terry McLaurin. They're spreading the ball around a lot more. Eric Bieniemy's using Logan Thomas like he's Travis Kelce. We have no idea why that's happening, but the thing that is so frustrating with Terry McLaurin, I think will correct itself in the next coming weeks, is that he has an 84.6 catchable target rate right now, which is 12th in the NFL and is by far the best of his career. His target quality rating is also 12th in the NFL. For reference, an 84.6% catchable target rate is 13% better than it was last year. It was 71% last year. It was 73% in his best season in 2020. So what I'm looking at with Terry McLaurin is a pass-heavy offense with a quarterback who can hit Terry McLaurin down the field. The new scheme seems to involve the tight ends more, but simple regression and process to me tells you that both Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson are good buy lows, especially Terry, given the track record we have. The Washington Commanders right now are first in the NFL in pass rate over expected, and they're running an up-tempo offense, as opposed to last year, they were the 31st ranked pace of play offense, very run heavy, and we're seeing this year that they're putting a little bit more faith in Sam Howell, and rightfully so. Sam Howell is the best quarterback so far that Terry McLaurin has ever played with. He had a bad game in Buffalo, but the other 4 games that he's played so far have been good enough quarterback play to support a guy like Terry McLaurin. The targets, and for whatever reason, are just not going his way, and I think that'll correct itself.
Yeah, I agree for the most part. I will say I am a little bit concerned that the offensive design is at play here. Not to mention it kind of feels like they're getting way more people involved. Like I'm seeing De'Ami Brown on my screen. I'm seeing Antonio Gibson get like 6 targets. Like I feel like it, like you said, it's kind of just like whoever's open is just going to get the ball at this point. And it kind of seems counterintuitive because you think, Terry McLaurin, I think he's like a top 15-ish level, like real life talent. You would think, well, if the open guy's getting the ball, why hasn't that been Terry McLaurin? And I feel like I said, it's a little bit more offensive design based. So if you're getting Terry McLaurin based off how he's played this year, I think that's a perfect buy. Like you said, I think the peripherals are strong. I think the quarterback plays there, and I do trust this offense more than I have in past years. However, as we know in some leagues, man, like people have sunk cost fallacy on their mind. If they spent a 4th rounder, a 5th rounder on Terry McLaurin, That's what I'm a little bit worried that they might ask for that type of cost, which I wouldn't be willing to pay for. But if the cost is more so like, hey, he hasn't played well, like if you give me 6th or 7th round equivalent value, I would take it. If that's the type of cost, I'm buying. But if again, they're stuck on that 4th round price tag that they paid in the draft, I would rather, vary away.
Yeah, that's fair. I think you're getting a guy that has wide receiver 2 upside for very, very like flex production type of price tags. In home leagues where he has a lot of name value, maybe that's not what you can get. But I mean, he's currently the 61st highest graded receiver on PFF right now, and he's averaging 1.35 yards per route run. So we're talking about a guy that just simply hasn't played very well. Yeah. And if he plays better, the offensive environment and the offensive situation will reward him because his quarterback's throwing more. He's throwing more accurately than a quarterback that he's ever played with. And if Terry McLaurin returns to those like 85, 90 PFF receiving grade type of games that we know he's capable of doing, then he can be, a Chris Olave type of dominance in terms of alpha wide receiver production. So I think I'm willing to buy him for some of these prices like CJ Stroud, Jared Goff. CJ Stroud and Amari DiMercato were traded for Terry McLaurin. Like Evan Engram at tight end was traded for Terry McLaurin. Like if you can get him for flex production and potentially even waiver ads like you're listed here, I would 100% be willing to do that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Again, that's like 6th, 7th round price tags. That's like people saying, hey, listen, Terry McLaurin's a bust. I'm willing to give up on him. If that's their mindset, I'm more than willing to buy. So I agree with you there. Kind of a similar theme, to be honest, especially with the first 4 weeks of my guy, Drake London, wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons. He had a good game this week, and a lot of people might be thinking, oh, he had his big game, but he still has Desmond Ridder. I got to sell high. Because that honestly is how public perception usually works. I actually view him as a really big buy. I think if you have Drake London, A, you should not be selling. And B, if you don't have Drake London, you should be going out and seeing what the cost is in your league. He's a young wide receiver, second-year wide receiver, coming off of 2 straight 24% target share games. And he's commanded 100% of the end zone targets for the Falcons in their team's last 3 games. Desmond Ridder is coming off his best game as a pro against a Texans defense that has actually been good against the pass this year. I mean, he put up his highest PFF grade, 87.9 PFF grade, which literally led every single offensive player for the Falcons this week. We don't need him to be an 87.9 PFF grade per week, but if he can be, like I said, going into the year, like a top 25-ish level quarterback versus the absolute train wreck he's been to start the year, Drake London's going to profit because like we've said ad nauseum throughout the offseason, ad nauseum even to start the year, London's peripherals are already phenomenal. If the quarterback play is just not terrible, he's going to produce at a wide receiver 2 or above level. So if we're getting Desmond Ridder potentially taking a step, this Falcons offense, aside from Desmond Ridder, has been playing well all year. We just need the quarterback play to stabilize. And if this week 5, is any sign, it shows that Desmond Ridder, as a young player, is learning and starting to get into the groove.
Yeah, I think the key metric that you want to look at there too on this chart is on 3rd and 4th down, Drake London's got over a 30% target share in 4 straight games. He's the go-to guy on that last drive where they kicked the field goal to beat the Texans. I think he had like 3 or 4 targets alone on that drive. So he is his go-to guy, and he's the one that is going to be the one that he looks towards when he needs a first down or when he needs a big play. And the underrated thing about Desmond Ridder too is that he's thrown over 31 pass attempts in 4 straight games right now. So we're getting a guy that is actually throwing the football, unlike, the 19 pass attempts or whatever he had in week 1. So, Drake London is a guy that I think I'm also willing to buy high on. Probably somebody that you can expect high-end wide receiver 3 production out of, good flex production out of going forward for the rest of the season. So, I think a lot of people are going to be fed up with the situation and be willing to sell high on him or sell high, quote unquote, on what they're getting. Quick tight end talk, just because we never talk about buy low tight ends. We actually mentioned Evan Engram briefly. I think he's a pretty decent option right now because, it's great usage. The Jaguars offense is starting to come together. It's a lot of target competition, but this is almost like a poor man's 49ers situation where, in the 49ers situation, Ayuk, Debo, Kittle, and McCaffrey are not all going to produce every single week, but you want to put them in your lineup every single week because 2 or 3 of those guys are going to produce. In Jacksonville, they're not quite as good as the 49ers offense, but I do think, we're going to get 2 good weeks out of, Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk, or Christian Kirk and Evan Engram, or Travis Etienne and Calvin Ridley, or whatever. And those guys are going to have their productive weeks. One of them will disappoint every week. One of them will be kind of meh every week. But Evan Engram, 20% of the targets, 84% of the routes in this offense, that's a legitimate top 6 tight end right now because there's not a whole lot of tight end production unless you have Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, George Kittle, or Sam Laporta. Nobody else is producing at that kind of level. And you could make the argument from a usage offensive situation standpoint, once the Jags get, back on their feet, that Evan Engram could be like a top 5 or 6 tight end rest of the season.
Yeah. So he, for reference, he's currently the tight end 7 in fantasy right now. He has about 7.4 targets per game, 29 receptions in 5 games, aka 5.8 receptions per game. He is currently the tight end 7 on 0 touchdowns on the year. For reference, like he's never been a big touchdown guy, but last year he had 4, year before he had 3. Like he's not going to finish with 0 throughout the year. So the fact that he's already the tight end 7, despite not having a single one in 5 games, we should see at least, a touchdown or 2 within the next couple of weeks. And even if you want to sell high at that point, maybe he's a tight end 1 across the next couple of weeks, and you want to try to see if you can get up to Sam Laporta, George Kittle, somebody in that tier. I think Evan Ingram's kind of deflated right now because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can get into the sells here. Some of the guys that we're selling high on coming off of monster games. My sell is Adam Thielen, who's actually been really good this season. So don't get me wrong. I don't think Adam Thielen's a terrible option going forward. I actually have him ranked as a top 35 or 32 wide receiver rest of the season because he's shown, and maybe we should have seen this coming. Like you have a young quarterback. He doesn't really know a whole lot about the league so far. He's going to rely on his veteran target, and that's exactly what he's done. You guys can see the targets over the last 4 games for Adam Thielen. He's been well over a 24% target share in every single game. He has like a 26% target share on the season. He's getting 41% of the 3rd down and 4th down targets. Again, similar to what we said with Drake London. That's the type of guy that is being relied upon to gain and move the chains on 3rd down for his quarterback. But I think right now is the perfect time to tier up from Adam Thielen. See if you can go up and get DK Metcalf like you can see in the streets. See if you can go up with Jordan Addison and get Kenneth Walker if you need a running back. Or see if you can go after Austin Eckler or Saquon Barkley or Josh Jacobs or Tony Pollard or somebody like that. You can use Adam Thielen plus another piece on your team to go up and get a much more solidified, stable option. And because most of you guys, I'm sure that are listening to this content probably have deep rosters and deep benches because you've built out a lot of good production, you can, use that to upgrade your starting lineup. That's always something you want to be doing because Adam Thielen, as good as he's been so far this year, you want a better option to be a weekly starter value over replacement guy for you. And if Adam Thielen plus, let's say, Christian Kirk, who's already in your starting lineup, gets you up to Chris Olave, then it makes way more sense to do that.
Yeah, he's a very good consolidation option, like I said, especially if you're in shallower leagues. Like if you're in a 3 wide receiver, 2 flex league, and you're like, okay, I don't really want to like sell low on Thielen because I want to make sure I get value back. That's fine. But when you're in a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league, or even 2-2, like the consolidation is everything here. You probably got, if you have Adam Thielen on your team, you probably got him in like round 12 or round 13 of your draft, and he's giving you wide receiver 3 level value right now. But the con of Adam Thielen is that he's still an older wide receiver. He still had lower body injuries in the past. And right now he's coming off such a big high, that 28-point performance that he had with that, of course, late touchdown he scored this week. If you can sell him at that type of value, get away from the risk of him being an older wide receiver in an offense that, quite frankly, just needs wide receiver bodies, whether they trade for T. Higgins, whether they trade for any wide receiver on the market right now. Like they're going to add someone, I think, to this room at some point before the trade deadline. And I would rather get away from Adam Thielen now, knowing his risks, knowing the type of market value he holds.
Yeah, because even if they only trade for like Jerry Jeudy or something like that, it's going to hurt his value in terms of what people are thinking about Adam Thielen. So yeah, he's a guy that I think you should sell high on, try and consolidate to a better asset. The ultimate sell high of all sell highs right now is DJ Moore. Like, and if you didn't pick him, I obviously would have.
DJ Moore, I mean, he's the easiest sell high in fantasy right now. Based off the expected point production versus the actual point production he's given you, like there is an absolute no-brainer. Obviously, we know the song and dance, had that huge game on Thursday Night Football, blew up in a big way, but according to our friend Ron Stewart, he is the single most efficient wide receiver right now in terms of scoring points in fantasy over expected. So his current expected fantasy points is 11.4, which would equate to the wide receiver 41 in fantasy. But he's been so good making the big plays. The offense has exploded the last 2 weeks that he's averaging 22 points per game and is the wide receiver 6 in fantasy at the moment. And I love DJ Moore. I think he's a really good player, a fringe top 15 to 20 level talent in the league, in my opinion. But there's a good chance that given the fact that he's scoring 22 points per game and he's the wide receiver 6 in fantasy right now, you could probably sell him for a wide receiver 1 level price tag. This offense has looked good the last 2 weeks. Do not get me wrong. Justin Fields has looked a lot better, but that was after 3 weeks of looking like the absolute most dysfunctional offense in the entire NFL. Is this more of a product of them playing against a bad Commanders defense, a bad Broncos defense, or is this more of a product of Justin Fields and this offense taking a turn? And right now, given DJ Moore's current valuation, you're not baking in that type of volatility in terms of his value. You're not baking in the fact that, oh, maybe it was the caliber of opponent. Maybe, you know, the first 3 weeks are more indicative of what we're going to see moving forward. And I'm fine. Like, if DJ Moore does end up being this good rest of season, I'm fine selling him at this value, knowing the process was there, that this offense can absolutely flatline. Because like we saw in those first few weeks, there were absolutely no signs of life for this offense. So you were talking about DJ Moore a couple weeks ago as being, you know, wide receiver 4 or 5 stash. What do we do with DJ Moore? Like, he's not giving me anything. This offense looks bad. And now you have an opportunity to sell him as a wide receiver 1. If you do not sell him at this current value, you're just doing a malpractice to your team.
Yeah. The key is to get up to somebody who's a more stable asset, like Amon-Ra St. Brown, for example. Maybe you can trade DJ Moore plus a piece like Adam Thielen on your bench or somebody else on your bench for Amon-Ra St. Brown straight up. Because the devil's advocate argument here is maybe this offense is turning the corner. They play the Vikings this week, play the Raiders next week, and play the Chargers 3 weeks from now. So they do have more good matchups on their schedule where Justin Fields will probably look like a capable quarterback. But as we've seen from Justin Fields, his play is hot and cold. We don't know what to think, like we said, of this offense. Is the first 2 weeks or the first 3 weeks indicative of what we can expect, or is these past 2 weeks indicative of what we can expect? I'm tending to think it's going to be feast or famine. 1 week we're going to look terrible. 1 week we're going to look solid. 1 week we might look great. And I think that's going to make DJ Moore a back-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 for the rest of the season. So like you said, you can get up to Amon-Ra St. Brown, or if you can get up to anybody in that range, Brandon Ayuk maybe coming off of a lower performing week, then you probably have to do it. DJ Moore is a fine hold if nobody's willing to give you a decent price tag for him. But if you can get one of those back-end wide receiver 1s at a good value, then you got to do it.
Yeah, no, completely agree. I mean, even if he does perform at a high value these next few weeks, which like very well could be, like you said, given the matchups, is his value from a trade perspective really going to go higher than the wide receiver 6 in fantasy points per game right now? Like, I'm baking in the fact that this offense just, despite the good matchups, reverts back to where it was. And at that point, instead of selling him like we said for a wide receiver 1 price tag, you're maybe trying to scrounge back, you know, low end wide receiver 2 level price tags for him.
Yeah, and that's where I have him ranked now. He's my wide receiver 23 rest of the season. So I still view him as a low-end wide receiver 2. But like you said, you could probably get wide receiver 1 price tags for him. So that is the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe if you're new around here. If you want access to our rest of season rankings, our weekly rankings, our dynasty rankings, check out the link in the pinned comment down below for flockfantasy.com. Use promo code FSE for 30% off. You can also get our weekly rankings and our rest of season rankings by signing up on Underdog Fantasy using promo code FSE for 100% back for a limited time up to $500. So if you put in $250, you'll have $500 on the site to play with. Definitely check that out if you're interested. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.